Welcome. This is another in a series of interviews with Libertarian candidates running in Wake County. I'm Brian Irving, the press secretary for the Wake Libertarian Party. Today we're having a conversation with three of our legislative candidates on two of the hot issues in the 2020 election. When this year began, neither of these issues was on anybody's radar. But now it seems like they're the only things anybody wants to talk about. And they are the COVID-19 pandemic and the renewed call for criminal justice reform in the wake of several instances of police brutality. The candidates I'll be talking to tonight are Travis Groo, who's running for State Senate District 17, Basson, who's running for State House in District 36, and Dee Watson, running for State House in District 49. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. Let me start by, appreciate it. Now, let me start by talking about what a sad commentary it is that both of these issues, the COVID-19 pandemic and criminal justice reform, have become so politicized, have become so much a part of the Democratic Republican tribal warfare, good versus evil. Hopefully tonight you will hear from Libertarian candidates who talk about a middle ground, a common ground, and ways that we can bring people together rather than divide them. Let's start with talking about COVID-19. And I think we start off by acknowledging that it is a serious situation, and there's been some good things done and some bad things done by the state government. So let me start by asking, what things do you feel that the state government has done well, and what things have you think they've really messed up? I'll start with Bruce, and then give the other two candidates an opportunity to respond.
Okay. Well, when it comes to the state government, I think it's a difficult situation. The best response I think that we've seen worldwide may have been in New Zealand, right? In New Zealand, they managed to get the pandemic under control very quickly. But this is also a country which is very small. It's an island. And North Carolina isn't an island. There's no way to seal the borders for our state. And so the best that we can do, I think, and that we have done, has been to somehow try to limit the spread of the disease, which we've done more or less successfully in some ways. I don't know at this point that there's a lot more that we can do given how widespread the disease is currently. We have issues, or we have measures in place such as closing down bars but leaving restaurants open. I'm not sure that some of those measures at this point make a lot of sense. Now, does wearing masks make sense? I think absolutely it does. But what should we be expecting the government to do? I think we should be expecting the government to lead, right? Not necessarily implement draconian measures, but what we should be expecting is for them to convince everyone that there is a right course of action. It is to limit the spread, and we should be following that course of action.
Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate that. Dee, let me ask you a question about the science behind this. As Bruce mentioned, wearing masks does make sense in some circumstances, but there are a lot of people that don't feel it's necessary. So let's talk about what the science is and how would you interpret it? And I think one thing to keep in mind is that science is not static, which some people seem to think it is, that what we know today may not be, we may find out is wrong tomorrow. And one thing we've learned about this COVID thing is that we've learned that we don't know a lot about it. So let's talk about that a little bit.
With the science, I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge that it's changing, like you said. It's like when we first saw the modeling for COVID, there were just huge assumptions made in air in a wide range. It's kind of like predicting where a hurricane will hit. And as it gets closer and you get more information, you get a lot more definition. And I think that too many decisions were made on science that was not solid at the time. And we have changed this into some kind of social stigma to do anything that could jeopardize the situation. I think the biggest problem with the science is that we are looking at infectious disease experts who are experts and want to minimize the spread of this disease, which is an admirable goal. But on the same team of decision making, people didn't think about the impact of the economy. And a big problem is the school system. People didn't take into account the impact in the COVID slide that would occur by closing schools. And people just weren't given adequate time to plan. I remember the governor, my older kids go to a charter school, and they were told that they were going to close. And that same day, the governor on a Friday said, we're keeping schools open. This isn't dangerous in kids. This is the guidelines. And he closed them on Saturday. So the public school system in Wake County had no ability to adapt. Whereas the charter schools were able to come up with a plan at the time, and while the kids were in school, and teach them the technology that they needed to have to go online. And I think when you're making a decision you're saying one thing on Friday, and then the next Saturday morning you're saying something different, and you're not giving anybody time to plan, it had a disastrous impact. So I think we should be science oriented, but more nimble in acknowledging that we need time to think.
That's good. Follow the science means sometimes changing directions. Travis, we've heard from both Bruce and Dee about the government response. Now, it seems to me that the Republicans in the General Assembly had pretty much gone along with the things that the governor in the other party has decided. So let's talk a little bit about, if you were sitting in the legislature, are there anything that you would have tried to get the state to do, or specifically maybe not do? I'm sure there's a lot of things about closing businesses that we would have issue with, but let's talk about that a little bit.
All right, thanks. Well, first of all, science isn't always cut and dried. What we think we know today may not be true tomorrow. And when these mandates were put in place, it was put in place with half information, and nothing was proven. And we know for a fact that individuals and private businesses have done more to combat COVID-19 than any government edict by practicing what their mothers taught them. They didn't need to be told what to do. They were doing it voluntarily before government mandates. We put this out back in mid-April, and it stands today. We should have the government offer suggestions and recommendations for private businesses and individuals to practice safety and practice social distancing. But anytime a government mandates anything, no matter if it's taxes or masks or shutting down businesses and bars and gyms, mandates don't work. In fact, it actually hurts people more than it helps. And the mandates, although seem to be the right answer, it's done a lot of harm to hurt small businesses, and it's done a lot of harm to hurt families, especially families that have to stay at home now because their kids can't go to school. So their parents have to stay home to teach the kids, what do they do about their job? Unless they're working from home, they have to either quit or find something that they can do from home. But when the economy is doing bad, it's very difficult to find a job. So I do not support mandates at all whatsoever, ever, under any circumstances whatsoever. As a libertarian, the government should not mandate anything. So that's my stance on it.
Okay, that's good. That's a good lead into that, to my next question, which is, what role does the state government in particular, let's confine it to the state, because you guys are running for the state legislature, so you have a say in that when you get elected. What role does the state government have in a public health situation, recognizing the fact that not every place in North Carolina is the same? We all agree that one size does not fit all. And we hear politicians now talking about federal mandates. And so tell me a little bit about, I'll go back, we'll start with Dee and go through all three, give all three of you an opportunity to answer. What role does a state government have in a public health crisis?
One responsibility of the government, where they're actually doing an excellent job, is collecting data and disseminating it. That's really helpful in decision making. They actually are doing a really good job with that, and they're having a lot of transparency, and I appreciate that. I've been really happy with those things. And also, Travis is right, giving guidelines. I think the problem is that they've given some guidelines that turned out to be false. You know, for a while they were telling us we shouldn't be wearing masks, and obviously that didn't make sense. And so just giving guidance, but the problem is I think they've overstepped their bounds by making too many things mandatory.
Okay, thank you, Dee. Bruce.
Well, I think I agree with that statement. I mean, I think the information, getting the information out there is something that government can do uniquely, maybe. It can give it can play the leadership role, which is one of the things that we would like to have at times like this. I mean, one of the things about COVID-19 is that it is a disease that hits different people differently, right? I mean, there are people who get very, very sick from it, and there are people that die from it, and there are people that have consequences, right? We don't know who's going to have the worst consequences, to be honest. There may be genetic markers that we don't know about yet, right? So one of the things the government can do is stimulate and encourage and promote understanding of a disease like this as rapidly as possible, so that we do know, so that we can make the right decisions. So that's what I would expect government to be doing at the time like this.
Thank you, Bruce. And Travis, you get the last word on this question.
Thank you. And I agree with both Dee and Bruce. The government's role is to offer recommendations and suggestions by first going to professionals that aren't going to lie to us and tell us 5 different things. So it should be based on accurate science and accurate information. Then they should offer strong suggestions for the private sector to either obey or not obey. You can't force someone to follow rules that you make up, but you can offer some firm suggestions based on science, based on real information, based on trials, clinical trials, and only time will tell how the disease affects certain people differently. So a one-size-fits-all across all 100 counties in North Carolina is really, really silly, because Wake is so much different than Guilford, etc. So offer suggestions, offer some science, offer some data, let the people, they're smart enough to make decisions on their own. We have to trust North Carolinians to make the best choice for their family.
Okay, Travis, thank you for that. Now let's transition to the second big topic that's being discussed widely, and that's, well, basically it's police brutality. But from libertarian perspective, it's about criminal justice reform. And it's curious that these issues, something that libertarians have been advocating. Many of the reforms that are being proposed, ending qualified immunity, ending warrantless searches, are things that libertarians have been advocating for decades. So let's talk about that. I want to start with Dee. What needs to be done to reform our criminal justice system and stop these egregious cases of blatant police brutality?
There are about 2,000 laws on the books. Nobody can, in North Carolina, nobody can possibly know all the laws. There's all kinds of problems with the level of understanding of even what the laws are. So we've got a real over-criminalization problem within North Carolina, and it's really profound. So the first thing is, when you've got that many laws that are on the books that people don't know about, the potential for an officer to come along and indiscriminately pick on a person and almost prey on them and arrest that person for a law that nobody would even know is a law is an issue. There's also the problem of there's some laws that we know that are victimless crimes. We always talk about getting rid of legislation that is criminalizing victimless crimes. So that's the first thing. These laws are horrific. They're impossible to follow. And we need to go through all of the statutes and change that. We need to end qualified immunity, which is problematic. That's not even a law. That's a judicial overreach as far as I'm concerned. And it's harming people all over the place. But it's disproportionately harming certain races much more than it's harming white people. So this is really causing horrific trickle-down effect. And the other thing that we have to look at is we have all of these jails. I looked it up today, and there's over 2,000, the capacity in Wake County is over 2,000 people that can be put in the county jail. People are put in county jail, that's not a prison. A prison is for somebody that's been convicted long-term. There's actually room in our county jails for over 2,000 people. And those are people that they haven't been sentenced or they're given a very minimal sentence. Why do we need that much space? I mean, it's mind-boggling. These aren't hardened criminals for the most part. So when you look at just the amount of resources that are going for it, it's horrific and it's harming people.
So ending qualified immunity, like you say, is a judicial overreach. I'm going to ask this question. I'll ask it of Travis, but if anybody else wants to jump in, feel free to do so. People who oppose ending qualified immunity say that it will prevent police officers from acting the way they need to act or reacting in a situation. They need to think quickly. If they have to second guess themselves for fear of being sued or worse yet, sentenced to jail or for something, that this will affect the way they can conduct their jobs. How would you respond to that, Travis?
Well, it's just like if a private citizen shot somebody in the back that's unarmed because we don't like what they're doing, or they're not listening to us, and we can't put them in handcuffs and they're walking away, and so we shoot them, we'll get charged with attempted murder or murder. So qualified immunity really protects government officials from the same laws that apply to non-government officials. And so it's wrong, and they're protected based on previous cases. And another thing is no-knock raids They have no business busting in your house and knocking down your door and breaking your door jamb just because they want to raid your house. You know, a warrantless raid, that's wrong. And like Dee was saying, we have the most incarcerated country and state. I mean, I don't know about our state, but our country has more people incarcerated than any other country. And they're in there for victimless crimes. And what we're doing is we're putting police officers in really dangerous positions. They should not be chasing these minor fake laws that politicians made up because they don't like a certain substance. We're putting officers in really bad positions that they should not be even involved with. And that is half the reason why there's police, violence on the streets, because they have no business being there anyways. If there's no victim, there's no crime. Until there's a victim, then the police can show up.
Okay, thank you, Travis. Dee or Bruce, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
So with the qualified immunity, in Raleigh today, Keith Collins had been shot 11 times because he had a BB gun in his pocket. The officer who shot him is not going to be charged for anything. That's because of qualified immunity. If you think that there's not a problem with qualified immunity, I urge you to just watch the Daniel Shaver video and tell me how that person who killed Daniel Shaver is not in jail. And the defense was qualified immunity. And you're watching a sadistic serial killer torture and kill somebody, and they're walking free because of qualified immunity.
Yeah, I would just make a comment, which is every doctor knows that when you are getting your medical degree, that one of the things you do is you take an oath to do no harm, right? And I think police should have the same attitude. First, do no harm, right? Police should not be, they have enormous responsibility, but with that responsibility, there comes the notion that you have to be careful. You have to be very careful with what you're doing. And I think that we have seen a disproportionate or unequal application of justice. It lands more heavily on some people than others, and that's just frankly unconstitutional. That should not be a situation that we're willing to tolerate as a society.
Okay, Bruce, thank you for that. And just for the record, so the viewers will understand that the issues we've been talking about are ending warrantless searches, no-knock searches, demilitarizing the police, no armored vehicles on our city streets, investigating police misconduct, police review boards and body cameras all the time, ending qualified immunity, where basically police officers cannot be charged for anything they do while they're supposedly performing their duties. And one thing that we haven't mentioned is ending asset forfeiture, where the police can come in and basically confiscate your property. And even if you're acquitted of the crime, or even if you're never accused of a crime, because they suspected you of something, they get to keep the property. All these items are part of our party platform, the Libertarian Party of North Carolina, and most of them are also covered in our national party platform. Just wanted to end with that upbeat note. Let me just end with this last question on this issue, this criminal justice reform issue, because it is a hot topic, and again, it's something that the Libertarians have been advocating for decades. How do we reach, the minority communities who are most affected by all of these things? Most of the incarcerations in our country are basically people of color, and therefore minor offenses. How do we reach that community, that target audience, with this message that, hey, we libertarians have been with you on these issues for decades? I'll just open it up. The first person who wants to respond.
Well,
I'll start. Oh, you want to go, Bruce?
Sorry, I can just say that, you know, ending the drug war has been something that libertarians have been advocating practically since it started. Drug war is a victim. It's a war against victimless crime, and getting rid of it would tremendously help communities that are disproportionately affected by it. And so I think that's a place to start.
Yeah, the war on drugs and ending zoning, where we're zoning certain types of houses and certain types of neighborhoods into certain corners of the city. But mainly, I think the way we reach the community is teach them that they have rights. A lot of them don't know that they actually have rights. And as we educate and teach them that they have just as many rights as anyone else, they'll start standing up for themselves and implementing their rights. So that's really it. And letting them know that libertarians have been with them since 1971.
And Dee, you get the last word.
I think it does help to reach out to some groups that are already working on that. Like, there's a group called Black Guns Matter, which is an advocate for Second Amendment rights for African Americans. Some of these organizations already exist, and I think they're very friendly to us. And then also the Black Lives Matter group is organized on the top, is not friendly to us, obviously, but some of the affiliates are, and not everybody who, you know, like there's Black Lives Matter New York, which like Hawk Newsom, much more friendly to third parties. So I think that we could reach out to those groups.
Okay, thank you, Dee. And that's about all the time we have. I don't want to make this too long. We've covered some very significant topics this evening, the two significant topics that everybody's talking about. We've been speaking with 3 Libertarian candidates running for the state legislature in Wake County. They're Travis Groo, running for State Senate 17, Bruce Basson, running for State House 36, and Dee Watson, running for State House District 49. They will be on your ballot in November, along with Steve DeFiore, our candidate for governor, Shannon Bray, our candidate for U.S. Senate, and Joe Jorgensen, our candidate for President of the United States. Thank you, and have a nice day.